Hi, everyone. Welcome to Conservation Cafe. It is a real pleasure to see everyone and have you here tonight for what is going to be an absolute treat with my good friend and former colleague and wonderful, wonderful, wonderful former host of our chair of our Taking Nature Black conference, Caroline Brewer. So Caroline has a long career in journalism, in advocacy, in environmental communications, and now in writing. Well, in writing for that whole time, as a literacy educator, and now a children's book author. She has a new book out, which she'll tell you about. You can see it behind her shoulder, Say Their Names, which is just a beautiful read that has so much to say about about police shootings of Black Americans, and told at a children's level. And I was able to read it with my 3- and 5-year-olds, and they had so many questions and no fear. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful way to share with them a really challenging topic that is powerful to know about at even a young age. So thank you, Caroline, for the gift of that book and your art and your words. So tonight she's going to give us a masterclass on telling your story of belonging. And I'm going to introduce a little bit about our organization and then turn it over to my colleague Vince, and then he'll take it from there to introduce Caroline further. Nature Forward seeks to create a larger and more diverse community of people who treasure the natural world and work to preserve it. We inspire residents of the greater Washington, D.C. region to appreciate, understand, and protect their natural environment through outdoor experiences, education, and advocacy. We are local in the D.C. region, and we are really excited to be a local organization, and also through events like this, to host people from all around the country. Tonight, if you have something to say on social media, you can tag us, and you can tag Caroline. I'm sure she can put her handles in the chat. We'd love to hear what you have to say about tonight's masterclass. Tonight is a masterclass. It is a new and unusual format for us for Conservation Cafe. There's going to be a really wonderful agenda laid out, which I'll share with you in the chat in a little while so that everyone can follow along with the sort of order of operations. But Caroline will be leading us through a series of activities and engagements, and we will have breakout rooms later on. Oops. So when I'm going to ask everyone, please, to keep your microphones muted, your videos off, and I will turn them off for you if they accidentally turn on so that we don't get interruptions until the time that we get to the right activity moment to go ahead and open that up. And at that point, there'll be some breakout room opportunities and some other Q&A opportunities, and we'll invite you to turn your video and your microphone on and engage. And I don't remember if I introduced myself, but I'm the Director of Conservation at Nature Forward. And at this moment, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Vince Robinson.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. It's really going to be not only a masterclass, but an entertaining presentation. Caroline, I've known for, I can actually say at this point, most of my life. Friends, literally.
Don't say it.
Okay, got to put it out there. Years ago, and I don't know if you remember this, Caroline, I did an introduction to Caroline at a business function, and I described her as one of the superheroes of that time, and actually I compared her to many superheroes. That was many years ago, and her powers have only grown and gotten even more potent since then. I mean, she is truly a master storyteller, and I think the power of her storytelling is really what has helped Nature Forward as an organization, and really any organization she's been around. So I think the lessons that you'll get from her tonight will really help you in your storytelling and getting people really to be passionate about your cause. So a real treat in that. I also want to thank Caroline in advance for her help in terms of the Taking Nature Black conference. That's coming up next month. That'll be March 8th through the 11th. And Caroline, as the former chair, and me as the incoming chair, has been a blessing, really, in terms of providing some guidance and some help. And again, a lot of creativity in terms of storytelling. So again, thank you for that, Caroline. Again, really stay tuned, and there'll be some chances to interact a little more engagement later in the presentation, but I'm going to turn it over to Caroline for, again, what's going to be a great presentation.
Thank you so much, Vince, and thank you, Eliza, for inviting me to host this masterclass. It's the first of its kind, and I'm really honored to be here and grateful for the chance to share this space with you guys. Vince, I do not remember that story, but if it's written down anywhere, would you please dig it out and send it to me? I'm gonna put that on a refrigerator and just remember it every single day. That it sounds so beautiful. Thank you. And thank you all for being here today. Please continue to introduce yourselves. We have an action-packed masterclass tonight, so hang on to your hats. It's gonna go fast. What I promise you you'll receive are all the tools that you need to tell powerful stories that make a difference. And we're gonna do some interactive engagement in terms of discussion, in terms of writing, in terms of revising. So we're gonna do a lot in this next hour. And the goal is to set you up so that when you leave, you have all the tools in your toolkit. And I hope you make at least one friend, or you've brought a friend with you who will support you as you continue on your journey to write in a way that makes a lasting impact. I don't want to belabor who I am much longer, but I do want to share with you why this masterclass and how it came to be. I, as you know, former communications director for Nature Forward, and also I was a former communications director for the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence. And we know that those are two of the biggest issues facing our country right now. And so I was constantly challenged to find ways to get the media in particular interested in our issue, and sometimes very challenged to get politicians interested. So my writing career began as a journalist, and along the way, I was invited to write in a variety of formats. And it wasn't until people started to respond in ways that were really profound that I began to understand the power of writing and the power of storytelling, and that we all have that power. If we believe in what we're doing, if we believe in the communities that we belong to, then we have the power to tell stories that will change lives. And I just want to share just a few quick stories. As a journalist, at my last job, I was a features columnist, and I wrote stories about people we called inspirational. And some of those people that I wrote about were people who ended up winning $100,000, $50,000 for their organizations after their stories started to circulate. And there was one young woman who rescued a number of students in the Seton Hall fire, and she was really struggling to recover. She had severe burns all over her body. She was a beautiful young woman, and her recovery was very serious. And after I wrote her story, the governor of the state granted her a scholarship to continue the rest of her education tuition free, and all sorts of people came in to find ways to support her and her mom. And so those stories really brought a lot of meaning to my life, and made me feel that my work could have an impact, and was having an impact. And then there are a couple of children's books that I wrote, including the one behind me, the most recent book, Say Their Names. So I wrote this book for children. It came out back in the fall. And one of the first book talks I gave, a father was there. And that father came up to me afterwards and told me that for the past week of his life, he was disturbed that a friend had died. But after listening to the story, he had his first moments of peace. So the book wasn't written with this man in mind. I had no idea that he would be in the audience. But to know that he had found a measure of peace after the premature death of his friend obviously lifted me and once again helped me to understand the impact of my words. And then lastly is this children's book that's a middle grade novel, Darius Daniels' Game On. I wrote this book and published it in the fall of 2019. And a cousin who is an elementary school teacher contacted me 2 weeks into the school year and said that she had a student who was beating himself in the head and saying he wanted to die. So I asked her if she thought if I reached out to him or if she shared the book with him and invited him to be a pen pal with me, if she thought that would help. And she said, yes, absolutely, immediately. I knew nothing about this boy except this one terrible moment that he experienced. And lo and behold, he got the book and we got to exchange some letters and talk on the phone a couple of times. And he never had another experience like that. He ended up becoming a leader in the class. And every time I spoke to him, he sounded so mature, so thoughtful, just another beautiful human being. And so I share those stories to say that I have been really fortunate to have people respond to my writing in ways that indicated that it might have saved their lives, that it brought them a measure of peace that they had been seeking, that it certainly inspired them to take action, to do things for other people. And I know that we all have that in us. And I know that our movement, whether it's the environmental movement or any other movement for social justice, needs all of us to be able to communicate that way. And it's not that everything we write will require the kind of work that we're going to put in today, but it's that we can certainly be thoughtful about big plans that we have where we really want to make an impact. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, and we'll get a little more deeper into some of these tools as we go along. So I'd first like to ask if anybody has any response to what I've just shared. If you'd like to ask a question about it or have anything you'd like to say.
And let's encourage folks to use the hand raising tool, and you can unmute yourself when Caroline calls on you.
Great. Okay.
And did you see in the chat, there's a question from Vince.
Vince, thank you so much. How do I define story? That's a great question because we're going to talk about a variety of formats. We're going to talk about stories that we might use in a news release, stories we might use in advertising or promotion, stories we might want to develop for a grant, stories that we might want to put in the form of a poem, stories that we might want to write for an op-ed, or just an essay. Maybe we want to, it's a blog post, but we want to do it in essay format. So a story is an experience. You're telling of an experience that has meaning to other people. For me, that's just the simplest way to think about it. Because when we are telling stories, we want to connect with other people. We want to invite them into our world, and we want to acknowledge the world that they live in. So we relate an experience that we have or that we imagine could be had to people who will find meaning in it. So that's what I'm thinking about when I think about a story. All right. Anybody have any questions about that definition? Is that working for you? Feel free to make a note in the chat that it is or that it isn't. And let me know if I can share any more. Okay, lots of thumbs up. All right, so we're going to get on with telling our own stories. So I'd like for you to write a little bit about, we've already asked you to introduce yourselves. And so I've shared my background, and I want to just establish what writing is, because writing is intimidating for a lot of people. And the reason I have confidence that we can get a lot accomplished in this class is because I've done this with children and I've done it with teachers on numerous occasions, and we usually don't have as much time as we have today, and everybody always produces something that's meaningful. So one of the first things we have to establish, especially for people who are not professional writers, is that writing is simply talking on paper. I tell children that if you can talk, you can write. So when you're feeling stuck, just talk to the paper. Tell the paper what you're thinking. And professional writing that's going to be released to the public, should always go through an editing process. So it's not that everything you put on paper ends up as a final draft, but you want to give yourself permission to release those thoughts. Don't be intimidated by feeling that it's got to be perfect when it first comes out, because normally it is not. And even professional writers like the novelist Neil Gaiman or Maya Angelou, I remember her saying, "I hate writing, but I love having written." So that's just a common sentiment for the writing process. So writing is just talking on paper, and because writing is a little different than talking in that we have rules for writing, and those rules are meant to help everybody understand and engage with what we've written. So we need some consistency around writing. So writing is talking on paper with rules, and reading is entering the conversation that the writer is having with us and listening for what the writer is trying to say and making sense of what's on paper, what is the paper trying to tell us. So I see that Fred has a comment here that says, in our legal system, it is stories that are used to capture and convey legal principles and ideas. Precedential legal cases are essentially stories about past legal controversies that are used to recount various legal rules or principles. As lawyers, when we read and cite cases, we are actually referencing unique stories. Thank you, Fred. Yeah, the power of stories to every aspect of our society is legendary. It's everywhere we look, we find stories that make meaning in people's lives. So want to find some good stories? Go look up some legal precedents or call on Fred and ask for some examples. So we're going to get started on writing our stories, and I'd like to ask you to share 3 things. Write it down on your device or paper if you're using that, and you can also share it in the chat. So what story, what environmental story, what social justice story do you want to tell? What does that story have to do with belonging? And should every story have something to do with belonging? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write an answer to those questions, and then we'll discuss it quickly. So what story do you want to tell? What story did you have in mind when you came here tonight that you want to tell? And what does that story have to do with belonging? And should every story have something to do with belonging? And I hope you guys have had a chance to read some of the essays in belonging. Okay, so Kendra's asking if those questions can be put in the chat. Vince, are you able to do that for us?
I'm not sure what you mean. Type them in the chat or?
Yes.
I can do it.
Okay, thank you.
What story, environmental?
Just what story do you want to tell?
Coming up.
Oh, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that.
Beautiful. Okay, Eliza's
Oh,
got
she already did it. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What story do you want to tell? What does that story have to do with belonging? And should every story have something to do with belonging? So this is just getting some of your thoughts together as you prepare to tell your story. I'm going to take one more minute, and then I'm going to invite some of you to share. Anybody who is ready at any point, just raise your hand and Eliza will call on you. I may not be able to see everybody. Looking for some hands. All right, we got Jimmy. Jimmy says, I want folks to understand how they have the personal power to grow habitats in their area or even their home. I want people to understand that by surrounding themselves with nature, they will see how much more connected they feel and how much they belong on our world or in our world. Thank you, Jimmy. And do you have an answer to the question about whether every story should have something to do with belonging? Every story should include.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's on the self-centered side, it's a very effective way to connect with people, right? Because you make them feel like it's not just they're being told something, it's an opportunity for them to join something or become bigger themselves or something like that. And then I think the the other reason is it's empathy, right? Like if you're just kind of broadcasting your message out in the world, it makes you a little bit less empathetic. But if you're saying, come join me, there's a natural empathy to that, I think.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And we all want to belong to a group that makes us feel that we belong, right? So if the invitation comes with space to belong, comes with the understanding that everybody belongs, that there's a role for everybody to play, that everybody is welcome, that's going to be a much more powerful invitation than one that suggests we only want you because you're of a particular group, you have a particular background, or maybe you're wealthy and we just want your money. You know, it's really important for people to feel that who they are is valued. And so that's why every story that has impact is a story where people feel a sense of belonging, in my opinion. Okay, got some more entries here. Fred, do you want to read yours?
Sure. So my friend Tom Wisner, who passed away a few years ago, some people know his recorded works. He was a recording artist. Some people called him the Bard of the Bay. But at any rate, Tom used to tell me to go sit next to the river and listen to her. He always used the female pronoun. The idea being that nature tells you stories, the wind in the trees and the murmuring of the water. But you really have to have kind of a certain state of mind to be able to discern those stories. So the stories are all around us.
I love that. Yeah, very powerful. Thank you. And Tanya, do you want to share?
Hi. Thank you for this. I really appreciate this event. I'm here in my own capacity, but I work for the USDA Forest Service, and one of the elements that we've been trying to advance is this work on equity and environmental justice and on tribal relations. And I don't know if we're supposed to do video on or maybe video off. I'm not sure.
I asked you to turn it on.
Okay. On. Okay. So in that, it's not my story, and I have difficulty in that being a federal person. And so I'm trying to relay a story that's ours as a federal agency. And then, yes, I think that the idea of belonging is enormously important. And in sort of our learning, we tend to get stuck in D&I, and we're not even familiar with the sort of concept of belonging, which I think is inherent to not only having a healthy work environment and making people truly feel included, but that's what it really means to have equity, is that sense of belonging. And I think it's not just an internal element that we need to consider, but what does it mean to belong in regard to the entire public that we serve? And so how do we change that lens? And so we can tell a story in which we can better and more equitably benefit, everyone and not just some. So thank you for this. I appreciate this opportunity to learn.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I look forward to seeing what kind of progress we make today. I just want to ask, have you read some of the belonging stories that the Forest Service was a part of helping us? Okay, great. We'll check back in and see if there's something there that has helped you as you've been thinking about the Forest Service's story. Okay. So we have a response from Queen, where she talks about preventing lead poisoning and acknowledging lead poisoned children and the harm that's been done to them. Says children belong in school and other activities that they might find it difficult to fit into. Thank you, Queen. We will look forward to hearing from you in terms of some of the things you're learning about how you might be able to share that story. I imagine there are some cases that you've been involved in. Is that true? Queen, are you with us?
Yes, good evening. That is true, Caroline.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll be looking forward to hearing a little bit more about those stories.
Thank you.
Vince talks about taking nature black, that the story relates to belonging because it's about people connecting to share concerns, challenges, and solutions. And every story should have something to do with belonging in the sense that the story is relevant to the reader. Thank you, Vince. Okay, we won't be able to go through the other ones, but thank you for sharing. There will be opportunities as we continue. All right, so the next three questions we have are, how many attempts have you made to tell this particular story? What format are you working with? So this is just to give us an idea of kind of where you are in your process. So Eliza has put those questions in the chat. These will just take a minute, put them in the chat or write them down for yourself. And it's just a part of your journey. What format you've chosen and whether or not you've been at this for months or weeks, or this is just your first attempt, just to give us a sense where people are. So some of the formats, did you see? Op-ed, essay, news alert, news release, marketing, advertising, a speech, a TED Talk, model speech, a grant, a poem, a song. So Queen, several attempts writing books and essays. Have you finished any of those, Queen? It sounds like you've been working at this.
Yes. Yes, I have finished in the process of updating now, but an idea to do like a sequel to it. Triumphant Over Lead will actually be the title, in which I want to have anecdotes and stories from lead poison adults. Now they're lead poison children, now they're adults, and I want to capture their stories. And my son being one of those.
Okay. Beautiful. All right. So Lucy working on the county council. Carol, this is her first attempt. She's facing the tyranny of the blank page. We're going to talk about that. And Jimmy, so far is dependent on one-to-one conversations. All right, Jimmy, we're going to talk about how to translate that, what seems complicated, into language that more of the general public can understand. And thank you, Tanya, for letting us know it's your first attempt. All right, now we're going to dig a little deeper. We got 4 questions, and we're going to do a little writing with these. Who are you? What do you do? What do you want in terms of, and some of you have already answered this, in terms of what you're writing about? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want people to do in response to what you're writing? And the last question, the most important, why should I or anybody care? So just do as much as you can to answer those questions. I'll give you a few more minutes. It's 7:37 on my clock. So we'll do 5 minutes, 7:42. Who are you? What do you do? What do you want? What do you want people to do in response to the story that you're telling? What do you want to happen for your organization or your cause? And why should anybody care? A good story has to answer those 4 questions. People have to be clear about who you are, what your organization is up to, what you want from them in response to your story, and why should they care? In as simple a language as you can use right now. Because most people, I think it was at the time I was in the newspaper business, most people had an 8th grade level education. So unless you're planning to speak to scientists or doctors or people who are in professions where they've got a graduate level of education that will allow them to understand bigger terminology, then we should all be speaking very simply so that the masses can understand. And even if you are speaking to scientists and people who are used to using complicated vocabulary, it's a good idea to simplify your language for them too, because that's a way to get to their hearts so that it's not all about what's in the head. Because what we really want to do, we want to move people. We want people to take action as quickly as possible, as quickly as reading a lower elementary story to a room full of adults and a man says, for the first time in my life, or for the first time since learning of my friend's death, I have peace. Okay, so we're going to go through some of the responses here. Queen says she wants to eradicate lead poisoning while increasing public awareness for the issue. We should care because children are dying and those that survive have a decreased and changed quality of life. That's an excellent reason to care. Thank you, Queen. Jimmy, a native gardener, he wants everyone to make a connection with at least one of the plants, insects, or birds that drive the complex ecosystem we live in. If you can make just one connection, you'll know what it's like to have a relationship with something in nature. So I'm going to ask you, Jimmy, why should I care that I have a relationship with nature or that anybody else does? Can you think of something that's happened to you, something you've observed that demonstrates why it should matter to other people?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one of the things that is difficult to put into words. I tell people that every 3 weeks a different bee comes to my garden from the 3 weeks before, and I don't know how to explain why that's so exciting, other than that it just is, and you didn't realize that all these things are out there already, just waiting to kind of come up to us.
So let me ask you, have you been a gardener all of your life? Have you been around gardening all of your life?
Not as much as I am now, but my mom was a gardener and I helped her out, so I have a familiarity.
Okay. How have you changed being a gardener in a way that other people who might not be gardeners could relate to?
I think learning about native plants and putting native plants in the ground, and also not wanting to learn about not having to take care of things that don't really want to live here versus taking care of plants that are easy to take care of because they're native to here. I think that was the big change for me.
Okay. So when I'm asking about change, I'm asking about personal change. I'm asking about, are you calmer because you have this relationship with nature? Are you kinder? Are you gentler? What has nature taught you? As Fred mentioned, when we really want to connect with nature, we listen to what nature is telling us. So I'm just going to ask you to think about that, because we're going to have a draft, another round where we'll get to share drafts with one another.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing. As I said, this is going to go fast. So thank you to Lucy and to Gail for what you shared. I'm just checking to see. Gail, okay, you want to persuade our county leaders to take action. That is such a noble enterprise. And you say that trees can help us adapt to the climate change that affects us every single day. I'd like you to be thinking about stories of climate change where you've seen damage, whether you've seen impacts that affect people on a personal level, because those are the kinds of stories that we can tell. We need to think about our unique place in advocacy. They're going to know the facts, and it's wonderful to tell the facts. We always need to have the facts at hand. Every story should be true. It should be demonstrable. There should be lots of evidence to back it up. But we want a story that every human being can relate to. So we got to go deeper into why it matters. And think about it in a way that children could understand. There's a famous line in the movie Philadelphia where Denzel Washington tells his client, explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old. And he's talking to an adult jury. Everybody in the courtroom is an adult, but he wants him to really break it down so that a child could understand it. So I'm going to ask you to do that. And then Gail, and let's see who else we have here. Kathleen, I want you guys to be thinking about that too. And Danielle. Okay? All right. So we're going to move on to the next exercise. This is called, I call these engine starters. So you've got all the facts, you've got some observations. What you need is something to hook your readers, since we're talking about mostly about stories that people are going to read. But if it's a TED Talk or a speech, it's going to be stories that people are going to listen to. So I've got a list of engine starters here. They include book titles. I've listed some book titles, but what I'd like you to take a couple minutes to do is think of a popular book title, probably from a best-selling book that a lot of people would relate to. So I've got 50 Shades of Grey, Brown Girl Dreaming, A Snowy Day, Long Way Down, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, Born on the Water, A Wrinkle in Time, A Tale of Two Cities. So that's for books. And you only need to do one of these categories. So think of a great book title that you think might have a connection to the story you want to tell. Then, or you could think of a song title. The Sweetest Thing I've Ever Known by Lauryn Hill, which I used in my belonging essay. Why? The King of Love is Dead, which is a popular song written and sung by Nina Simone after Martin Luther King was killed. What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, Mississippi Goddamn, which Nina Simone also wrote after the deaths of 3 civil rights workers, and Imagine by John Lennon. Thank you, Eliza, for putting these song titles in. So just think of the first favorite song that comes to your head, and maybe there's a way you can work that into your story. And then I want you to think about, or you could think about profound questions, and usually they come from children. So the example that's here is a 3-year-old child asked her mom, "What does marry mean?" And her mom said, "It means that you love somebody so much that you want to spend every day with them." And so the child says, "I want to marry grandma." So it's a profound question that can lead to an answer that you hadn't thought of, and that it might work for bringing more interest into your story. So I'll come back to my story about my 4-year-old niece who asked me, "Why you call me darling?" But also newspaper headlines. Sadly, my research on newspaper headlines turned up lots and lots of dark events. The lightest ones I could find were Nixon resigns, the first footsteps, the eagle has landed, Lincoln shot, Mandela freed, shock, disbelief, and grief, Kennedy assassinated. Those are not light, but King George is dead, Elizabeth is queen, wanted, dead or alive. So sometimes when people write stories or tell speeches, they frame them around events that most people know, that have, sunk into the popular consciousness. And so they find a way to bring their story into this popular moment in history. So sometimes there's a little twist on it. So those are ways that, we can kick our stories up a notch. And then there are poems and popular commercials, ad campaigns, movie quotes, and famous movie lines. I'm gonna, Eliza, if you can cut and paste and put those in there, great, but don't worry about it. So I'm gonna just ask you to go through these and just find one that comes to your mind that might work for you in your story. Eliza, I think you wrote something about rhymes, alliteration, funny words, sharp jokes, all things I wouldn't have come up with at all in my wonky brain.
Yeah. Could I take a moment and just mention it while people are thinking of their own?
Sure.
So when we worked together, and Caroline and I had the pleasure of working with Caroline for, I think, almost 5 years. As the director of conservation, my job was to sort of come up with things we needed to say. And then I would say to Caroline, okay, we need to say something like, this development is very bad. We should, and it's bad. she would say, how bad is it? Is it bad like it's going to squash the salamanders? Is it bad like it's going to poison the drinking water? She would just get me going. And I would say, no, it's not so bad. It's going to poison drinking water. But yes, it will squash salamanders. And we would like just sit in her office and pretend to be kindergartners, like making up words together. It was so fun and so different from all the analysis I had done to get to the point where I was worried about the salamander squashing. But when I would come out of her office, I would be ready to speak to reporters with a headline for our news release and a whole bunch of quotes that got the scientific point in words that were like quotable and really fun. And sometimes they were a little snarkier or meaner than I might have, said in my measured way, but they were much, much more likely to be picked up in a quote that way. So, and then other times they just rhymed, or they alliterated, or they played off of one of these phrases that people already know. So I often felt silly starting, but then by the time we were done, I was like, this is amazing. How did we get to this point? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eliza. One of the ones, I think I put it in the agenda that we use, was Alexander's terrible, horrible, bad, really bad day. And we used that when there was a proposed development in Northern Virginia, and we were told there was no way to defeat this development. In fact, the developer was friends with the people on the planning board. But we decided to use that in our headline, and we just beat it home every chance we got. And lo and behold, eventually the Washington Post picked it up. And I think it was the day that the hearing was supposed to happen, Eliza and Monica Bilger, who was the Northern Virginia advocate that day, got the word that the hearing was canceled. And I think to this day, that development has not proceeded. It's not been built.
That's right. It's been on hold.
So that's an example. And it just so happened that it was in Alexandria. So there was just so much connection to this very popular children's book that we were able to kind of play with. All right, let's see. All right, so Kathleen says, Safe, Healthy Playing Fields needs to do that. The one I have thought of recently for the hotter than asphalt rubber playgrounds and plastic fields is at a hashtag, no child fried outside. That's good. That's good. And hashtags have helped. They've really helped to simplify issues that seem to be really, really complicated. But I think what we have to remember is that generally we're talking about saving lives, improving lives, making things better for people. And so if we think about that and keep that in mind, it can help us simplify what we want to say. And there's been so much written in a really powerful way that gets to the point. And these resources, poetry, songs, newspapers, can help us, can help us come up with a headline or a phrase that brings everything into focus. So we need you guys to share. What do you have to share in terms of a line from a poem, newspapers, books? Who else has come up with something that might work for what you want to write? Feel free to put it in the chat or just unmute yourself or raise your hand. We can hear from you. Eliza mentioned we used lipstick on a pig once for a headline about the Maryland governor. Hogan's Beltway expansion plans. Yes, we did. Queen says, children learn what they live. Very powerful. Lucy, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Okay. So Lucy, tell me how this relates to what you are working on. This is one of your favorite poems?
Well, yeah, it's one of my favorite poems, but it's also an old one. And so it's just what I could think of in terms of what hits my heartstrings, but who knows whether people on the county council even know of it because they're so young.
Well, you can educate them, you know. You can share verses from the poem and then talk about how that relates to, you know, maybe whether or not
Right.
we'll have a woods to stop by on a
Exactly.
snowy evening. Yeah, I think, you know, that could be.
I'd have to work it more. It's just what came to mind. And I had to, it was the first poem I had to memorize as a kid. So there.
Okay. Well, Robert Frost is still pretty popular, so I think if you mention his name, you'll get a reaction. Danielle, what immediately jumped out to me is the idea of the giving tree, how it's now time for us to give back to nature after nature has given, they have given and nature given for us. Yeah, I think that's a nice concept to work with, that nature has been giving to us, and it would be nice for us to give back to nature, which is also giving back to us because we need nature and nature needs us. Okay. Any songs, any movie quotes or titles that have come to mind? Okay. Again, we're going to keep moving. So what I'm going to ask you to do, Eliza's going to partner everybody up, and let's see. What we want to do is we're going to be just mini, we're going to have our mini critique groups. And what a great critiquer does for the writer is they ask questions. They don't tell the writer, oh, I like this. They can tell the writer, I love this, and be explicit about why. That's going to be helpful. But mostly the critiquer asks questions. Why did you choose this? What does this mean? What were you thinking? How does it relate to the story you want to tell? And if necessary, why should I care about something that's in a part of your story? So I'm just gonna, did I write that down on the agenda?
No, that list of questions is not in the agenda. It would be great if you could.
Okay.
Yes, it would be great if you could put them in the chat, and then also tell me how many people should be in each breakout room.
Just two.
Just two. Okay.
Yep. They will exchange what they've written and then respond to one another.
Okay. Do you want to take a moment and write those questions out? Well, and then because the breakout rooms will be ready whenever you're ready. And of course, folks, when you enter your breakout rooms, unmute yourselves and probably turn your videos on too, so you can see each other.
Yes. What I should have said, because it looks like we lost some people, was that if you hadn't written anything, you could just tell your story to your breakout partner and then and just get some feedback, because that's all what it's all about. We're, you know, it's pretty impossible to write a complete story in the amount of time that we have, but the idea was to introduce you to the tools and let you play around with them a little bit. So who wants to share? If you just raise your hand, Liza will make sure you get unmuted about the kinds of questions you got asked and how you answered them, or, you know, if you're going to work on answering them.
I actually would like to say, since we've gone down to fewer people now, some people left early before the breakout, so feel free to turn on your cameras and we can do this more meeting style, but do still keep yourself on mute until you're, you know, actually engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Be lovely to see everybody. Okay, what brave soul is coming forward?
Well, as you know, Vincent and I didn't actually get out of the main rooms, but I guess we were just our own stories of, so we were just to know each other. So I think we totally get what we were supposed to do down.
Okay. All right. Is everybody video, audio enabled?
Yes.
Okay. Looking for some brave souls to step up. We all learn from each other. So, Fred, I'm going to call on you. Where'd you go?
Here I am. I'm sorry. So we really talked more about process. I mean, we did swap some stories. We both have a lot of stories to tell. We both have a journalism background. Mostly we talked about what our process is, right? Mine is to really dictate and go back and edit stuff. You know, Chris kind of does what he does in his own way. Kind of intriguing because he has a lot more knowledge about a city that I should know a lot about because my family's all from Baltimore. But this guy actually has covered the city and so really knows stuff. So it was a useful conversation. I got some interesting ideas out of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Was that the kind of feedback you're looking for?
Yeah, I wasn't looking for feedback that you didn't follow the assignment, though.
Well, okay. We tried, but we couldn't quite get there.
All right, so let me ask Chris, since he's been sharing stories about Baltimore, what's the story you're trying to tell? And how did your conversation with Fred help you? Because I know it was helpful because Fred is an expert communicator.
Fred is excellent, and I was happy to see him in my breakout room. I think it's partly my fault for not following the assignment. That I don't have a specific story that I'm working on telling right now, but I think the larger story of connecting the residents of Baltimore to their waterways is always a bit of a struggle.
Okay. Any ideas from songs, poetry, your conversation with Fred about how you can tell that story?
Well, you're really putting me on the spot now.
I'd throw you a lifeline if I had one, buddy.
You should always have a lifeline. You work on the water. Oh, it's okay. All right, well, go ahead and keep thinking, Chris, and we'll see what other people have gotten in terms of feedback. Who else wants to step up and share?
I can, Jane Berner.
Okay, Jane.
Just real quickly, again, I don't think I'm answering your question exactly, but just wanted to share. It was really useful because I think it's Lucy is her name, and we were talking about what our story was, but we ended up both sharing, going back to our childhood and recalling specific experiences with nature that really impacted us at that time, and how powerful it was. And so we talked about maybe when we tell a story that somehow connecting those very powerful childhood experiences, like for her, in her instance, about the impact of playing in the woods had, and now she's advocating, for the forest conservation plan. And she asked me, as she's the one who started, like, what's your first memory of when you felt that you really had connected with nature, which was my story, to help others connect with nature. And just remembering that just was very powerful. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. We definitely, if you've read some of the stories in Belonging, a lot of us drew on our childhood experiences. So thank you. Lucy, did you want to add something to your conversation with Jane?
Let's see. Well, I was trying to work on the connection to a poem, but when I pulled up the poem, I couldn't make a connection. It was, it had the words, but the intention of the poem didn't work. So that's why we abandoned. And went to our personal stories. But I think if we go back to when we were little, we were all little, and so I think all audiences can, look for, their childhood experience and try and relate. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great resource, and often with environmental issues that include science, we try to focus on the science instead of the experience. And so that's what we want, to help you do with this class tonight, is focus on experience, because the science is there, it's going to hold up. But the thing that will bring everybody into it, because everyone's not going to be an expert on waterways or air pollution or forestry, but we've all been children, just as you said. So we can relate to that. Thank you. All right, who's next? Don't be shy, we need to learn from you.
Well, I too have the same story that many others do, where we weren't quite sure what the assignment was, and when we also didn't have anything really pre-written. So I think it was Nataki and I were both spending a lot of time just sort of writing, which was helpful. And unfortunately, I think she got almost to the thing she was going to say, and then we ended our thing. So feel free to jump in, Nataki, if you have anything else. But I try to go kind of and write a headline. And so I said in quotes, breathing out and breathing in, which is a song lyric, growing a native plant or feeding a bee or butterfly will give you something to notice. And I was trying to kind of channeling this, like, it's almost like another form of yoga or something.
I love that.
Okay.
Very clever.
And I don't know. I've really struggled with this, because if I was trying to convince myself as a child to be interested in this stuff, I don't know how I would do it, because I just didn't gain any interest in this when I was until I was an adult and had kind of been around the block, and I was mature enough to kind of pause and slow down and start to notice things. And I think as a kid, I would have whizzed right by, and so it's hard to know how to connect to people, I guess, when it's this ineffable concept.
It is hard work, and it's not the kind of writing we're talking about. Having a particular story is not something you're going to do every day. This is for a special moment. It may be a presentation before the city council, or it may be a project with the U.S. Forest Service, or it may be a campaign for the waterways in Baltimore. So you want and you need more time. This is not the kind of writing that you do every day. I didn't do this kind of writing every day at A&S. It just isn't possible. But we did, in big moments, step back and say, what can we do differently? What can we explore that might help this, like the development, a relatively small development in Northern Virginia, and we get the attention of the Washington Post. And because we talked about how horrible it was, and we put it in the language of a children's book. So thank you, Jimmy. And Nataki, do you want to share with us what your experience was? We got about 10 minutes left. Thank you, Vince, for keeping us on time.
I don't really have much to add. I came in very late because I had trouble getting into the webinar. So I think I spent more time just trying to figure out what the assignment was, but it was definitely helpful to hear his headline, and to begin to probe and ask a couple of questions. So thank you for the tool.
You're very welcome. I'm sorry you had trouble getting in. I have all of my contact information on the agenda, so as you guys are working on this, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to respond, and my hope is that we can do another session. It might not be with Nature Forward or Conservation Cafe, but we are talking, Fred and I are part of a new group that'll be launching soon. We've been planning a series of master classes for some time. So
I also lost the agenda after we went into the breakout rooms. Is it possible to put that back in the chat?
Yes, and Eliza will email.
Absolutely. I'll do it again, and it will be in the follow-up email.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Okay, who else would like to share what your conversation produced? Allison, we haven't heard from you yet.
So Kendra and I had a nice conversation and got to know each other. And she has an important story to tell. She's in a environment, started a new job, surrounded by scientists and people who have studied environmentalism. But she just has an innate, and as a child taught herself the difference between trees. And so she has a childhood story, and she has, she told me she did some urban farming, so she got her hands dirty. And so I'm like, that goes a long way for, as I said, street cred in this. So and then I'm still trying to figure out my story. I'm on a green team with my church, and we're giving out native plants and encouraging people to plant native plants in their yard to stem the pollution, the water pollution that goes into the watershed, and erosion and that kind of thing. But I also feel like there's a wider conversation of just getting people to understand the importance of doing what they can for the environment with the climate crisis. And so that's where I know it's important to have some kind of personal story. I don't know, somehow it just feels like the right thing to do for me. But there was a children's book when I was growing up that was the author did black and white photography of a doll and a stuffed bear, and Edith and Little Bear, and they lived in New York City, and it was very smoggy in the 70s, and it was full of litter, before the EPA came in. And I think that story somehow stuck with me and resonated with me about the importance of cleaning up. And they petitioned the mayor, and it was the 70s, and they protested and had the hippie beads and all. It was a very cute children's story, but with an important message that even little people can make a difference.
Absolutely. We see them. Thank you so much for sharing, Allison. And Kendra, would you like to add anything? It sounds like you've got an amazing story as a child, teaching yourself the differences between trees. I'm still learning, and I'm way, way beyond being a child.
I am also still learning. I think, yes. So it was a really nice conversation with Allison. I think I often tell stories about other people a lot. And so I'm trying to work up the courage to tell my own story. Coming from a very typical non-traditional science background. I've been in love with science and the environment, like I said, since I was a kid and still as an adult. But not having the degrees or the certificates makes people don't always hear me, I should say, or I'm not valid in what I say because I do not have the Western tradition of expertise. So I'm excited to tell this story, a little nervous. I think I want to do an essay, but also a song, because why not? And yeah. Oh, and I'll say that with my conversation with Allison, I learned a new word. So I'm always grateful to learning new things. She mentioned conservation landscaping. So
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And what I'll do is I will also send Eliza the Google link that to the form that I used. Almost all of the writers in Belonging filled out that form to start their stories. So there are just a lot of basic questions that I suggested people answer so that they could just start thinking about what is my story of belonging. Because even for many of us who were writers, regular writers, professional writers, it didn't always, occur to us right away. We had to spend some time with it. So I'll be happy to share those questions if you guys would think it would be helpful to help you get going. Okay, great. And it sounds like you made some friends here, which is really, really wonderful, and could be helpful on your journey. So we got 3 minutes left. So I'm going to open it up to questions. And if anybody else wants to share, a couple people we haven't heard from. Lucy has her hand up.
I just wanted to encourage Kendra as a retired scientist with degrees and all that stuff that's intimidating you. I want to give you the courage to share your story because it will have an impact on the scientists. But I want to give you a heads up. They may not know to give you verbal response that they've heard your story, but in a group with shared interests, you're going to share your passion. They're passionate through a different route, but you both share the same passion. I think that's, so I encourage you and wish you luck. And I understand it takes courage, but you go. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Yes, ditto that encouragement from her. Your story is your story, and people will hear it if you just stick to telling it. There are people for whom that story will resonate deeply. Vince asked a great question. How does your approach to storytelling differ if your audience is the media versus a neighborhood, for example? And this is one of the most important things you can think about when you are going into the process of telling your story. Who's your audience? Who and what do you want them to do? So when it comes to the media, I think about all the things that the media needs. They need a story that's visual. They need a story that includes people who are experts, and they need a story that people will care about, that might fit the timing of the moment, what's happening, what's in the news. So I think about all those things if it's a story I want to tell the media. And then if it's a story for neighborhood folks, I think about what's going on in the neighborhood. What do I know about the people in my neighborhood? What are the things they value? Where do they come from? Learning as much about the demographics of the neighborhood as possible is so important. Who are the influencers in the neighborhood? That's really important because oftentimes your group might be small, but the influential people are the ones who might make all the difference in whether or not your story gets heard. So thank you, Vince. That's an excellent, excellent question. And again, I'm happy to continue the conversation with any of you guys.
But I'm going to ask at this moment, it's 8:30 and Conservation Cafe ends on time.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's here. We will have a recording available. I'll slice out Vince and Kathy's conversation during which they use the main room as their breakout room. And we'll include the important notes from the chat and all the resources that Caroline shared. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you know somebody who, it looks like we did have some technical difficulties with folks getting in tonight. So if you hear from anybody who registered, please have them contact me. I'll be happy to issue refunds for anybody who was really hoping to be here live and couldn't get in. And then we will, of course, have the recording available as well. I think we can let Caroline say goodbye, and then Vince and I have a little quick promotion to do for Taking Nature Black.
Okay, I just want to mention 2 prompts that are a part of the agenda. One is Imagine, the song by John Lennon. Play with that as a theme for your story. And then also Harlem by Langston Hughes. The first line is, what happens to a dream deferred? And I think if we think about all of the issues that we've talked about today, there are some dreams that could be deferred. There are some really important benefits to us from nature that might be derailed if we don't act. So just wanted to put that out there to also help you get going. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed your stories and wish you much success.
Thank you, Caroline. And thanks everyone. Vince, you want to take us out?
Yeah, thanks. We look forward to hearing about when the next sessions are.
I think that's Vince's perfect segue, actually.
Yeah, the Taking Nature Black Conference happens next month. It's going to be March 8th and 9th online, and then in person on Friday, March 10th at the Silver Spring Civic Center in downtown Silver Spring. Caroline will be presenting on Thursday evening and on Friday. So check out our website to find information. Everyone is welcome to the conference. It's a great way to hear some different perspectives, to make some new contacts. So just check out our website. Just go to the homepage, natureforward.org, and you'll see a link to the Taking Nature Black page. And there's also a link to the to download the Belonging ebook. So, talking about some of the stories in the ebook, it's a free download. I'll just go to the website and you'll be able to get that. Again, I want to thank everybody. I also want to make a plug for Caroline's personal website, CarolineBrewerBooks.com. Her new book, Say Their Names, is a piece of magic, because talk about telling a story about something very difficult and finding a new way and a very compelling way to tell it. Check out that book, CarolineBrewerBooks.com.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Have a lovely evening. And I hope we'll see you all at Taking Nature Black Conference next month. And a huge, huge thank you to Caroline.
Huge thank you to Eliza and Vince for hosting tonight. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Go have fun telling good stories.
Yeah. Take care.